So, welcome. It was really good to see you, and welcome to the set. I'd love to get
Thanks,
you
Rob.
over here. You're in New York for a while now.
Yeah,
so I'd like to get you over here
time.
maybe as a producer to help educate us to some of the things you're so familiar with. And in the audience, welcome very much to the conversation. This segment, it's Mr. Morris. First name is Ryan J. Morris, and he's a principal person behind a thing called Maison Capital, and he's a person of great intellectual interest and is very interested in the markets and so forth. But he's also very interested in things. We met at an event with Ray Kurzweil, who we both admire in terms of somebody who understands cybernetics and so forth. And we met there and had a brief conversation, and we're following up on that. And Ryan, sorry it slipped my mind quickly, but I've read a lot of your material, and welcome very much to the conversation.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's wonderful to be here. My first time ever
Your first time on
TV,
television.
so
Okay, on TV. Good.
The medium of the future.
Yes,
with Harold here.
Well, all right, very good. Now, Ryan, please, if you could, share with me your own background. You're born and raised in that. I know you come from upstate. I think you got some connection to Canada.
I'm from Toronto.
Yeah.
So I grew up, I spent the first 18 years of my life in Toronto, Canada. I went to a wonderful high school there called Upper Canada College, where
Upper what?
it was called Upper Canada College.
Upper Canada.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So more Canada.
Was it a private school or?
It was a private school, yeah, and so it was an all boys private school. So
it was like a prep school, they would be called.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah,
something
okay.
like that.
Really
all boys, so no distractions. And rowing was actually a huge part of my life there, and so if it weren't for that school, I probably wouldn't have been exposed to
How
that
about the
work
family
ethic.
setting? What was the family setting? Intellectually curious and encouraging, or what was it? Your dad, mom, and siblings and that?
I have one younger brother. He's very different than me, a couple years younger. He's a salesman, so I'm sort of the guy who sits and reads and thinks all day, and he's the guy going out and convincing other people.
And you were doing that as a youth when you were very young?
Yeah, I mean, I've been reading a lot since I was probably around 11, and there was sort of a weird moment in my life when I was around 11 years old, and I heard about this thing called nuclear fusion when I was in 6th grade.
Right.
And, for whatever reason, that just started this spark of just wanting to understand how things in the world worked deeper and deeper. And it was just the key that by understanding a really interesting and complex problem, you could solve so many of the problems in the world. And it's from that deeper sort of scientific understanding of things that you can contribute from that.
So you were into, as I say, physics at a young age, in a sense.
Yeah.
And you call your company Maison, which is like a quark or something.
Yeah, I came up with the name when I was 12, actually.
Really? So it goes back quite a while.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a historical artifact, I guess. But I was reading sort of college physics textbooks when I was 12 and 13. And
really?
So as you imagine, I was made fun of a lot as a kid. So
were you encouraged by your family in that intellectual direction, or?
Well, my parents, I mean, they're not professors or scientists or anything like that. My father's a businessman, and my mom actually has been a bit of an entrepreneur, which more lately, not when I was a kid. But mostly my parents were just really supportive in whatever I was interested in.
Yeah. And you had the makings of what I would call, we both used the term before the camera started rolling, autodidactic. That is, you're self-taught, and you have a great curiosity, and you were directing your own educational process in large measure. And I think that's the most important thing of all, that not be beaten out of the consciousness of youth, that they can follow their own lead.
An interesting thing, actually, on those lines is I'm very autodidactic, and I also tend to reject things that are forced on me, even if maybe they're for my own good.
I know the feeling well.
The example is French. So I'm Canadian, and
Yeah, that's right.
It's
Quebec.
Quebec. So it's a second national language, and so you have to. They teach it to you, and it's mandatory.
Right.
And so I just never, for whatever reason, I got it in my head. I actually had a really bad French teacher in fifth grade, rather.
So you're only
for whatever reason,
you're only about 9 years old.
Yeah, I would have been 10 at the time, and for some reason it just really put me off French. And ever since then, I think my knowledge of it peaked around when I was 10, and then it sort of started going downhill because they kept forcing me to have to learn it, and so I think I got the minimum passing grade to demonstrate my
chagrin.
Chagrin.
Right.
So I would make sure that I would pass, so they never had any sort of power over me to take it again. But
with all due respect, I think that's a wonderful trait of consciousness. A part of your consciousness is to not trust it, because so much of the education is given over to rote kind of things there. you know, like the old schools with Dickens, in Dickens' time, where they would cane you and things like that, and authoritarian principles they're trying to trying to instill in them. But anyway, did you go to university then?
I did. I went to Cornell University.
Cornell in Ithaca?
In Ithaca, New York.
Yeah, right.
So I've lived there most of the time for the last 8 years. I just moved to New York. I don't know. We'll see how long I stay. It's growing on me, though.
Mm-hmm. You like New York?
I like it, yeah.
It's a little one. How long? You're just a few months or something?
Yeah, I've just been here for a couple months now. I mean, I've visited before, but the first time I've been here for a really extended amount of time.
Welcome. What did you study at Cornell?
I was in engineering. I started in computer science, and I changed to operations research, which is still sort of computer science. But it's all about resource allocation problems, and effectively, I would call at the university level, it's sort of more applied than computer science. Or computer science is a lot of the theory behind creating algorithms and this sort of thing. Where operations research looks for the application first, and we say it's solutions looking for problems. So you have all these mathematical ideas that apply in a lot of different ways that you might not realize. So the fact that an oil pipeline has the exact same mathematical principles almost as an internet backbone or a busy airport.
Okay, yeah,
so
right.
The mathematical principles that abstract out of those, you can learn something in an abstract way and then apply it in a real way, which is sort of the long version.
That's an important bridge to be made there. It's a very important between theory and practical reality. And
it's a messy bridge.
Maybe it's a
good one to cross, though. People who don't cross it can get in trouble.
And all kinds of metaphors: a toll bridge, a sway bridge, a bridge that goes up and down, and everything like that. But it's an important one, and the bridge between the future and the past. That's another one you could deal with. Were you into mathematics then, advanced mathematics, the calculus in that or not? Or
I mean, the relatively basic stuff was fairly natural to me. Once you get to a certain level where you have to remember all the little tricks of things, once it becomes memorizing and not conceptual anymore, that's where I get kind of lost.
Did you do the calculus or not?
Oh, yeah. I mean, everything is...
Did you like it? And is it different?
I like the concepts in it. I mean, I love all of the concepts in math, just the fact that you can pull certain information out of something that doesn't seem obvious, let's say, and so that you can have a set of rules that must be self-consistent, and because things have to be consistent in math, you can eliminate certain things and learn certain things that you otherwise wouldn't be able to.
Right.
I mean, one example is there's a theory, or a theorem rather, that if you have a surface of, just a function space surface, you can actually reduce, it's kind of like a hologram. You have a two-dimensional thing, and you can get 3 dimensions out of it, but there's a direct relationship. I think it's called Green's theorem, but just the concept that if you had certain information in one form, it would guarantee that you know it in a different form.
I see,
It's just interesting and not obvious at all.
Mathematics is very important to physics.
Oh, yeah.
And to other aspects of science, and you had a liking for science and so forth, but you seem to have a window on the practical realities also, as well as just theoretical.
Well, theory. I'm not a huge fan of theory, except for how much it can help in the practical side. So
you're practically minded.
I'd like to think. I mean, I've always been interested in just sort of what is reality, and reality is by definition practical. I mean, that's all there is.
You think there is, right?
Well, I mean, I don't know what else there is other than reality.
Is there a science of reality? I have the word ontology, or there's an ontology or an understanding of, or the science, or the understanding of reality. I don't know what else there is. I mean, do you understand what I'm saying? The reality can be at different levels, right? Because the reality is nested, and we have a universe. Yeah. But then if you looked into any of the theory of string theory or superstring theory that postulates that this universe that's 3.8 billion years old may actually be part of a pattern that is superstring, multiple universes, and they've got wormholes between them and that. Yeah. And there's a mathematical indication of that might actually be the case, or not. Maybe you haven't gone.
Yeah, well, there are different. Once you get to a certain level of studying your reality, I mean, you are and we are part of a system, and so you, by definition, can't go outside of that system, because every observation you have is part of the thing you are a part of, and so the idea that you could ever look outside of your own universe is, I don't know. It's like a fish looking outside of water.
At this stage, who is it? Who is it? I guess it's Green, Guy Green up at Columbia. And
Brian Green.
Brian Green, yeah, and then also Kaku. I think Kaku, Michio Kaku has done that, and it's based out of theoretical, particularly the mathematics seem to indicate that, which is interesting because that would be the mathematics are the basis of a lot of modeling of things that are not able to be grasped in reality, in the reality that we can grasp.
And it's the idea that you have to have things that are self-consistent. So if you have to express things mathematically, and so when you express things mathematically, you'll be able to tell if it jives with some other thing you're trying to express. And if they contradict each other, and if they do, then that's clearly not real. Reality doesn't contradict itself.
Okay, that's an interesting take on reality, as it were, and everything. Fuller, I liked. I don't know if you're young people; they're not as aware of Fuller, Buckminster Fuller.
No, we spoke about that a bit at the Kurzweil event. I've just heard a little bit about some of his ideas. I've read some I don't agree with. I guess one was the idea that men would stop needing to work. Once you get to a certain level of productivity, then we can have vastly more leisure time. But I think that doesn't give respect to the powerful competitive forces in the world.
Well, that would be something worth discussing because it's something that is, I liked him a lot. And Marshall McLuhan was a fellow, Canadian. I suppose all Canadians are proud of Marshall McLuhan. He was a man.
We all know each other too. So we all know each other too. It's a small country. Canada.
That's right. What do you got? How many people? And it's also I love Canada very much. I was raised in Detroit. Windsor was right across the street, the river and everything like that. And it's also got a lot of advanced things. And the Canadian Film Board's great. And as far as media and development and all that, it's a wonderful country and so forth. But McLuhan was a really interesting fellow in terms of understanding the effects of media. And he said the medium is the message. That the medium by which we communicate is more important than the message that we all concentrate on in terms of shaping context.
Context goes pretty far.
Well, Fuller postulated a synergy. He brought the term up. I said it with, I think you maybe watched the thing we did with Scott Draves and everything. And Fuller had postulated, he was a very interesting man. He's my main man, so everybody gets a main man you like and everything. But he postulated synergetics. And he used to talk to an audience of 10,000 or 5,000 as he's becoming popular out of a long climb up Mount Sisyphus of intellectual inquiry and so forth. But he would say, has anybody ever heard the word synergy? And nobody would have heard the word. And everybody knew energy, but they didn't know synergy. And it's behavior systems unpredicted by the sum of the parts. There's nothing, apparently, at resonancy, particular subsets of a system, there's a resonancy that interaccommodates them. And that also works through time. And you have a thing like, so it's behavior systems unpredicted by the sum of the parts, particularly if you bring in an biological evolutionary process. You're evolving, it's changing, and there's new species appearing and all that sort of thing. So in historical terms, you cannot know the nature of things until you get there, in a sense. It's sort of like, I don't know if that's Heidegger or what, but it's more like...
Call that irreducibility, maybe, or complexity. So the idea that... the shortest path. So if you have something simple, like in terms of mathematics, like a differential, function or differential equation rather, then if you have the differential equation that describes the motion of an object, you can tell at any point in the future. You just plug in the number and you know where it's going to be. But with something that's a complex or a chaotic system, the shortest path to figuring out the future is to just run the system itself. And so that's sort of along the same idea with this. And so and not everything follows that pattern. I mean, even within a complex or highly complex chaotic system, there might be little pockets that sort of converge that are inevitable to go a certain way. And that differentiating between what's knowable and what's unknowable, and things that are unknowable because no matter how much information you have, there's no shortcuts.
Well,
and so at least for me as an investor, I'm trying to figure out.
You're going to get to that. We're just talking theoretical.
Practical. It's interesting that there are some things that you can never, some parts of the future you can predict, but then and a whole lot of other things that are unknowable in a mathematical sense and in a very rigorous, hard sense, because every sort of error or every little miscalculation compounds upon the previous
That's
one.
right, particularly in a time when you got exponential things going on.
Yeah, and that's
as
always
we
true.
do now.
Evolution's exponential.
Yeah, and evolution's also second law, thermodynamics. Everything moves toward to what? Chaos or to the limits of the system.
I don't know if thermodynamics applies for evolution. I mean, because you have this whole planet, but then we have the sun that's always beaming down new energy onto it, and so we're not really limited. We're not in a closed energy state.
Okay, you're right. Yeah, that's within a closed system.
Yeah, so thermodynamics applies in a closed system, but the world is not a closed system. We have the sun that's burning, converting 4 million tons of matter every second into energy.
Do we know the Kelvin temperature of the sun? I'm not sure what it is. And then outer space, we've never been able to reach absolute zero.
Well, it doesn't
But everything's
exist.
occurred. And it's amazing to me. We got a 3.8 billion years organic process on this planet, third from the sun in this small universe and all. And it stayed within a certain temperature range for so long in order for the thing to happen.
Well, if
Ryan,
it didn't, we wouldn't be here.
I know.
We
and
wouldn't
I
be here
wake
to talk
up,
about it.
I talked to Scott, and I said, I wake up every morning, I'm amazed anything exists.
Yeah.
And I'm also the wonder of all the varieties there. I guess it was 8/10 of it was just once they crossed the barrier from inorganic to organic, about 3.8 billion years ago, 8/10 of that was just bacteria. It was just a thing. And we walk in a sea of bacteria. Then there came punctuated equilibrium, or you have steady state, and then there's a tendency through the whole. Fuller used to talk about compression, intentional integrity at a molecular level. Mm-hmm. So you've got a system. It'd be almost like geodesic. It's round, but it's flat. And then there's an entity that goes through it, and that you would say steady state. And then it gets to a point where there's like a quickening, like a birth canal. And then you have a thing where it reaches a certain point. There's a quickening, and then there's what they call an evolutionary theory. Stephen Jay Gould and Eldridge and that there is punctuated equilibrium, the new appears.
Yeah,
so we have
a
species appear.
dynamic equilibrium.
Yeah, and that's all moving. Fuller used to postulate that the biological process was an anti-entropic function in the universe, moving across consciousness and bringing increased patterns of conscious understanding to the process of which we are a part. It would have been very hard for an Australopithecine to work out an algorithm.
Yeah.
Because the consciousness,
one of them,
and you do understand what I'm saying. So that if you take the criteria of consciousness or of understanding or taking the conscious measure of things or reality or ontology or whatever you want to call it, the evolutionary process is apexed by humanity or by the Homo sapiens species.
So far,
220,000 years.
So far, it is. It looks
and
like
10,000 generations, and we get the point where the weapon systems are now species lethal. Do you think it's true that we have a passive competition and that kind of thing between peoples? Guy gets a club, he can hit people on the head and take over, and then they get bigger systems, and the species, the weapon systems that have been granted by political leaders to people who, Da Vinci and others who would develop new siege machines or something, they've reached a point now where if they were to be unleashed, it would mean the end of our Homo sapiens species?
Well, I think.
Or have you ever thought along those lines? Or maybe that's too woolly-headed thinking to be bothered.
Well, I think about it a little bit. It's like I said, I'm trying to be practical, and unfortunately there's not very much I can do about it. But
you don't think?
Well, not at the moment.
Or the intellectual process cannot think. Or we don't have...
Well, I personally can't. I mean, I'm not going to influence whatever the guys in Russia with.
Yeah, but you're young. No, I'm not in Russia or here. I mean, in terms of the politics. Also, we have a capability of... do you think we may be at a... We'll get to the investing, okay? But this is all theoretical stuff. And we're getting to the point where there's been a qualitative transformation. We may be at a moment... If you've got existential ability to destroy the process of conscious evolution in its leading edge, humanity at our own bit, that's an existential new reality that's not characteristic of history.
And that's not new, though. I mean, that's been true.
You don't think so? When could we
have... Well, that's been true since probably the 70s, whenever we had enough.
Well, the 70s is only yesterday, brother.
Well,
1970 was... Yes, right. Well, it was. Well taken. Point well taken. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
But,
I was taking
it. It's been true for 40, the last 40 years.
About 40 years.
A lot's happened in the last 40 years.
I agree with you. That's what I'm trying to say.
We've made a lot of mistakes, and we've cleaned up a lot of mistakes.
Okay. A lot has happened in the last 40 years.
But I think human nature I mean, certainly it's a risk. And even
you're talking about reality, so you're talking about human nature in some absolute realistic terms about what makes up human nature. It's malleable.
It is,
perhaps.
But I mean, evolution created us. I mean, there's some things you can learn from that.
Yeah, we cannot deny evolution.
Yeah, I mean, that's,
the evolutionary
that's sort of a superpower that helps us understand.
But it's really interesting to me because what are you, 20 or 25?
I'm 25, 26.
25. Oh, you're young. Okay, that's really good. I wish the hell I could be 25 again. I tell you, that'd be great. You're so full of vim and vigor and all that. And
all full of misunderstandings.
Oh, cut it out. Cut it out. Cut it out. Anyway, that's great. But it was funny when you said that. You said that we got raised a laugh out of you and everything. 40 years seems a long time. It's nothing compared to 220,000 years we've been here.
Well, no, but it's been accelerating. So, I mean, if you look at how much you've done in the last 40
Very
years.
important.
It's it's a decent amount of effort compared to the, say, 300 years or something before
The point
that.
being, is there something new? Is there coming to a point? Do we just go on forever steady state? Hitting each other on the head with clubs and everything. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I don't know.
You wanted to deal with reality. You wanted to deal with reality.
Yeah.
That's an existential new reality that as recently as the Second World War did not exist.
Yeah.
We were impotent in our capability to, at the level of species level, destruction.
Yeah.
And the question is there something on the positive side of that kind of an equation or something that is equally existentially significant that we're not taking adequate attention to because we lack vision about some sort. It could be we're able to, let's say, liberate the people of the planet and the ecology in a way that has not been possible to us because we were in a state that was it was like punctuated equilibrium as an analogy or as a metaphor to the transformation that we may be going through as a species, as an organic whole system in terms of the universe. Do you ever ruminate along those lines or not?
Well, we do. We have more power to change the world now. I mean, to manipulate matter and energy into different ways. And, and even if we have enough nuclear bombs to wipe things out, we also have a lot more bomb shelters now. And so there's always this tug of war between offense and defense, and certainly some innovations are stronger on one side than the other. The things that can wipe us out, like nuclear bombs, also give us power that can power things like hospitals and scientific research labs that'll help us live longer and all that. So everything's interconnected. It's not that there's one that everything stayed the same, and yet there's this one threatening existential.
You don't think the punctuated equilibrium theory doesn't hold weight with you? That there was a conscious.
Well, evolution doesn't happen in a straight line.
No, so but it happens in a way. If evolutionary theory is correct, it happens at steady state. Then there's a quickening, and then there's the new.
Yeah.
And that happened about 200,000 years for our species. Yeah. We may be coming to the end of that.
Can
you think ontologically, or in terms of a larger context within which we're part within the universe, where we may be coming into let's say, for instance, a liberated context that hasn't been available to us because we were not able to bring, in a kind of way, trans-scarcity as a material reality as part of the equation by which we operate our overall system, as one possible suggestion that Mr. Fuller used to advance. About the year 1970, both those lines could be modeled.
Yeah, and Ray Kurzweil, who we both
Ray
admire,
Kurzweil talks about
singularity. He talks about this, and he calls what it sounds like you're talking about the singularity, where there's this idea that it's actually an apt analogy in a lot of ways, where effectively once you get to this point, biology is no longer cutting edge, and in order to be able to keep up with the things that are changing, and because change happens so fast past this point.
Exponential.
Yeah, we sort of get, all exponentials start off slow.
Yeah, right.
And they sort of have this knee in the curve, and that's sort of the knee in the curve where once you're on the other side of that knee, then biology is just too slow to pay attention, really. And so information dominates everything as opposed to sort of the slow physical matter universe.
Right,
and once that happens, once information
that's coming with our
everything,
computers and things now.
Well, that's the thing driving it.
Yeah, and that's all extension of
consciousness.
And that's an extension of consciousness. Into the environment and make the environment different, like James Joyce used to talk about.
Yeah.
Make the environment different than in the Eden-like sense as a lot of most creatures that are biologically resident on the planet.
And part of it will be making the physical universe a lot better. Once we've completely reverse engineered everything in nature, then we'll be able to, it's a prerequisite that to change something in a way that you find desirable, you have to understand it.
Yeah.
And so that's true with nature, in that you have to really be able to reverse engineer and understand its principles. At the moment, nature is just more complicated, more complex, and
complex,
subtle than anything else that we've really come up with so far.
There's a lot to know.
Yeah.
That's a joke, son.
Yeah.
I mean, if you just think about all the nuance.
Well, and no one person can know it either.
Yeah, there's no way. No, it's a synergy thing and everything like that. And okay, that's all just sort of theoretical nonsense and stuff like everything. Yeah. But you become interested in investing.
It starts to become practical, but
yeah. I hope we make it. I think we're at a moment, and I'll just stop. But I just had to say, I think in the fullness of time, the year 2010, a Christian era. In the fullness of time, that's just a way station. And in the fullness of time, for whatever it's worth, and it probably doesn't make much sense to anybody, that the time into the future, say a couple hundred years if we make it, without blowing it all up, will be figured from about the year 1970. 1970 will be seen as year one. Yeah. There were existential events going on at both levels at that time that we've not been able to catch up with, and we got all these institutions we've inherited out of a condition that's been qualitatively transformed at the level of capability that we can't accommodate, and we're having all kinds of trouble, including things like investing or the economic order, which you are particularly interested in. Yeah. So that said, why don't we talk about Maison Capital, okay? Sure. And your view of the economy, and also you would be in a certain sense like a hedge fund person?
Yeah, I mean the word hedge fund doesn't really mean anything. It's just a term that's generally used for a form of private partnership that's exempt under the 1933 Securities Act.
And you are inspired by, you've become inspired by there was a book written in the 1940s by Ben somebody?
Yeah, Ben Graham. Ben Graham. So I'm identify as being a value investor.
A value investor, okay.
Yeah, and so the idea, this guy Ben Graham, along with David Dodd, came out of the 1930s. They wrote the original book, I think, in 1934. It was Securities Analysis was their first book.
Okay, and you've used that as chapter and verse, or you've learned from that.
Yeah, so that's sort of the three key principles of it that he and David Dodd were original in pointing out or in putting into certainly in a form that was easily understood by anybody, was effectively that a stock, and this is, again, the origin of this is back in the 1930s when people in the world are so disenfranchised with stocks and just thinking that no matter what, it's gambling and it's risky and just that mentality after the 29 crash and the 2 years after that saw the Dow lose 90% of its value.
90%?
Yeah.
Really?
It was pretty bad. It makes 2008 look like not a big deal, right?
Yeah, right. I understand,
So the world was a mess back then. Yeah. And, for a lot of reasons. A lot of people helped make it worse, but that's sort of another topic before Keynes was around. But so effectively the three principles are, one is that a stock isn't just a piece of paper that, it's not a piece of dirty laundry that people just share around and bounce around between each other. It's actually a piece of an asset, of an underlying business.
Absolutely, or of a property.
Sure, in real estate. But it's an underlying asset. It represents a fractional ownership of that. So that's the first thing.
Represents what?
A fractional ownership.
Fractional ownership.
So, if you have 1,000 shares and you own one, you're, along with the other 999 shares out there, you guys collectively
it's a measure of value.
That. Yeah. And so, the value is related to the business. And the second point is that the stock market isn't this... It's represented by this guy who he calls Mr. Market. And so it's as if, you and I are business partners, and let's say you're the Mr. Market here, and I'm just, Joe business guy. Yeah. And we're partners in business, let's say we both own some part of it. And every single day you come and you offer to either buy or sell a part of your business. So you can either buy a part that I own, or you can sell me the part that you own. And every single day you'll come to me and give me this offer, even if I, totally ignore you, or if I take you up on your offer, every day you'll come back, and you're very manic depressive. So this Mr. Market guy, as you can see, lately it's been pretty volatile things, but there isn't a clear thinking all the time with Mr. Market, and so the key is that you should never use him as instruction. You should never agree with him and say, oh well, he's all rosy and everything's great, and so okay, I should. Agree with you, but you can always take advantage of him, and so that's the key. Is that think of the market as just this guy who has an opinion every day, and you have no idea where this opinion comes from. It's just always there.
But it's volatile.
But it's very volatile. So you know what something's worth, and if you know what something's worth, then when he's sad, you can buy it from him. And if he's elated and he's overly optimistic about the future, then you can feel free to sell him your share of the business.
Okay, that's a metaphor. Yeah.
Yeah. So Mr. Market is just the key is the price is not information about the asset. It's just there, just to take advantage of. And then the third thing is that if you build, it's thinking like an engineer. It's called margin of safety. And so if you build a bridge to a 20,000 ton tolerance, then you don't drive trucks over it that are 19,000 tons. You only drive a truck that's 10,000 tons. And so you make sure that...
You've got a measure of flexibility or something.
Yeah, so if you think something's worth $1, you don't pay 95 cents because the future is an inherently uncertain thing. And,
that's interesting. That's synergy.
Yeah, or complexity or chaos.
Complexity
or all
chaos.
These things.
Yeah, you get into,
The idea that, there will always be things that you can't anticipate. And so you...
That's synergy, if I may.
Yeah, exactly.
Behavior system unpredicted by the sum of its parts.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay,
and the world is a very complicated thing with a lot of parts. So you can't know. And so you try to build in a buffer for that. So is that
called risk
safe.
or not?
Well, it's called the margin of... The idea is a margin of safety. So again, just thinking like an engineer. If you... you don't cut things close. You leave yourself a big gap, a huge gap, preferably.
And preferably, the more gap you're able to leave, the more conservative and steady your your position is.
Yeah, the less likely you're going to cross over a bridge and it's going to fall out from under you.
Where you get
where you lose, losing money.
Right.
So the idea is really to...
Or a crash.
Yeah. So you try not to lose money, and it basically means that in the short term, the only thing that price tells you, so all the ups and downs that happen in the market over the next day or week or month or even year, that's really just an opinion of somebody. That's just the dollar-weighted opinion of market participants.
Right. I guess that's true. Yeah.
And so that doesn't tell you anything about how many, cans of Coca-Cola is going to sell, or how many cars Ford's going to sell, or how much people who buy those will like those.
We want to get measurement to the degree we can have those elements. As much as you can have accuracy in those elements, that's an advantage, right?
Yeah.
You could project Ford's going to sell 10,000.
Yeah, that's the idea.
Yeah. So and that's information.
Yeah, and so you want to understand. I mean, the only definition of value of a business is the discounted cash flows from it for infinity, discounted at some appropriate rate back to the present.
I can't follow what you just said.
Oh, so if you
have... The discounted cash flow, what does that...
Yeah, so...
Try and speak
So if you have a bond...
English,
so if you...
No, every specialization gets like, a doctor. You ever hear doctors talk?
Yeah.
Everybody gets into their own thing. I watched 3 hours the other day, Ryan, of C-SPAN, where they're talking to...
I can understand that.
No, they're talking about the default and there's top guy, what's the big company, the one they're after? Goldman and everything, and they also had people from the government, and they were talking, and there was a young lady sitting behind them, and they're talking, well, if you could do this, and then a tranche, and then there's this and that, and they're talking, and nobody could understand it. The lady in the background was going like, I can't understand it.
Yeah.
But they know what they're talking about. Every specialization does. So what is it you just said? Advance something or other? What was that? It came so trippy.
So it goes back to Aesop. So
okay, that's good.
A bird in... So this is pretty old. It's about 2,600 years ago, I think.
Okay.
So basically, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush.
Right.
So that's the idea, is that the two in the bush, so I mean, that's the simple version. You also have to know your, how many are really in the bush. How likely are there to really be two, and maybe it's 3 or 4 or 1?
How accurate is the information being reported?
Hopefully that's not an issue, but that can be.
But it does. They have insider trading and secrets that can be gotten.
That's a fairly marginal issue. There's enough bigger problems to worry about. I mean, just trying to understand the reality of what.
But you'd want to have somebody who's making an investment or something, or somebody's doing business a serious way, would want to have the best information that gives them a view of reality as best as it is, without it being all clouded up by opinions. So it seems to me.
Exactly. And so that's the thing is...
Or a scientist would want the same. You don't want to have a lot of extraneous stuff.
Exactly,
rumor mongering.
More information doesn't necessarily lead to better decisions.
Yeah.
And so having more clear thinking where you're focusing on the important things, because it's generally, 1 or 2 dominating forces that affect what will happen to a business. If you're a retail store, for example, the location of that store is going to dominate a whole lot of other smaller factors.
Sure.
And so that's the thing, is you have to understand with different businesses, and that's why it's such a broad, such a broad discipline.
Also very important.
Well,
to have good information to make decisions.
Well, it's ultimately a case of resource, and this is sort of why I was originally so inspired to get into this back when I was around 12 years old.
12?
Yeah, I was a weird kid. It's really solving the resource allocation problem.
Okay.
And I mean, if you think about how important that problem is.
Resource allocation and investing?
Well, that's what investing is. I mean, you're allocating capital to different things.
That's a very important
thing. And money, there's nothing special about money. It's just a way of keeping track of resources, really. And so, that can mean labor or stuff that got dug out of the ground or whatever else.
Right, okay,
I mean, obviously we use money for keeping track of that. So
right,
barter.
Okay,
but,
accounting,
but I mean, if you look at, for example, the Soviet Union through the Cold War, or just through its existence, compared to the United States, I mean, the scientists, I mean, you and I are technologists and science-thinking people, and we think of technology and science as what drives progress of the world. And I mean, I don't think that's too much of a stretch.
I seem to be weighted in that direction. I mean, there's art and all kinds of other kinds of things.
But the reason that our standard of living is so much better now than it was 100 years ago is mostly because of scientific progress.
Well, I'm very worried there's some people coming to distrust the scientific process itself because it's becoming so politicized. I hear.
Yeah, that it's, that's always been an issue.
I guess it has, hasn't it?
Yeah, that always comes up.
Yeah, because the politics.
But it's hard to slow things down like that. I mean, they'll just get driven somewhere else where the politics aren't an issue.
Okay, you're right.
But I guess the point is that the Soviet Union had no less brilliant scientists than America. I don't think very many people would argue that. And yet, the amount of progress they made in the same amount of time that the U.S. made was minuscule. I mean, they were just dunces compared.
Well,
to
they were also attacked by the the Nazis, and they had that, and they had all kinds of things that made it difficult for them. And then they had an ideology, a political ideology.
Well, and that's
was
the key.
In favor necessarily, but just think also geopolitically.
Yeah.
They had they were the heartland. They had the heartland, and they had that, and they had but then they were attacked, and they were decimated. They had 20 million people, 25 million people killed in the Second War.
Yeah.
So, but then they had an ideology also that may not be operative in terms of some maximum thing because they were socialistly minded.
Yeah,
and do away with private property.
Exactly, and that's all about resource allocation.
Yeah, right.
So
okay.
Whether you're talking about
it's based on a view of human nature and politics and so forth.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not an expert on what exactly they were trying to do. I think some people.
Well, I think they were trying to do away with private. I think they were
means.
trying to do with private ownership because that's the source of inequity that has always been existent within all of our societies throughout all of history.
Yeah.
Somebody lives in a castle on the hill, and everybody else is slaves picking up things that the guy in the castle on the hill says they would, and they have a police force to enforce it. And so the people that are leading things have all the advantage, and the people are not being liberated. We used to have chattel slavery, remember?
I wasn't around.
No, you weren't around, but you remember. Call back, They had chattel slavery, and it's been like the serfs on a feudal estate. The Duke would lose it in a crap game in Vienna or something, and the serfs just went along with it like cattle.
So we have come a long way. We have come a long way from that.
James Joyce, who was Marshall McLuhan's favorite poet, he said, "History is a nightmare from which I'm attempting to awaken." Do you think that we may be awakening from a nightmare that has been inherently unjust or unjust throughout the whole of the human experience? And this distant thing, like the Jewish people would say, the Moshiach's coming, there's liberation coming. We may be coming to a liberated order where everybody, rather than being serfs on a feudal estate where somebody has all the power and ability to coerce everybody like that, which has been operative, that we might have an actual liberation where everybody could be liberated from the constraints of a system that forced them to do things like you did when you went autodidactically off and didn't pay attention to the French teacher who was trying to force you to do something like a slave master. If you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
And I think there's no doubt. Very few people, I think, would argue that we have far less freedom now than we did 50 or 100 years ago.
I think it's much more because of our technological advance, largely.
Yeah, I mean, you can on your phone, you can have access instantly to virtually all human knowledge that's ever existed.
You probably take it for granted.
Yeah, sure.
The older you are,
I mean, every time I do a Google search, I'm not like, wow. You know?
I am. I'm telling you, it worked. You know, you don't know.
You have to kind of get on with your. You know,
I know, but it's hard to do because it's so amazing to me. They can, like, we're going to stream this in Flash now, right?
Yeah.
This program will be streamed on the 15th, I think, of July, and it's going to be able to be seen everywhere in the world in good quality on cell phones.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
What kind of communication is that? In George Washington's time, they had 3 months to get a letter to London.
Yeah, so
now there's something big going on in terms of the evolution of information.
And it's one step at a time.
That can be actionable or can give modeling that can be actionable in terms of something practical like making an investment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, so all this communication, so it's interesting that in terms of from an investing perspective, one would think, oh, everybody has access to so much more information now, and so you'd think it would be much more competitive. And so this sort of idea that the markets act silly or inefficient at times, that effect would gradually go away over time as more information becomes more freely available and instantly accessible. But I think
that's an axiom or something, or could it be accepted axiomatically that is? Do you think it's possible that the number of people who could be considered to be, by whatever criteria we measure that, be a have? That would be in terms of material ability to have. We just went through a heat wave, and if you didn't have a refrigerator or air conditioner, you were going to suffer. We didn't have that in the past. How the hell did people work when they didn't have refrigerators and things? But that you go through that, and that the number of people who could be, if you tried to model, you'd have to get the criteria by how do you define a have?
Yeah.
Now that would also be information, knowledge, understanding, all kinds of things, as well as material things, and a sense of security from vandalism and all that haves, and that the percentage of the world population through time, if you just got a whole pattern rather than the details, how you arrive at it, it would be like an algorithm or something. You do. And that the percentage of world population that could realistically be seen to be haves have increased through time, so there'd be a higher percentage of the world population at the level of our capability through time as an axiomatic thing?
I don't know that it's axiomatic. And
you don't think?
And it doesn't.
Well,
it doesn't. I think
almost axiomatic or something close to axiomatic.
Well, axioms, you got to have a pretty high standard for an axiom.
Okay,
an
I know.
Well, then kind of at the bottom of the foundation.
Well, no, but I
thing,
mean
but there are more people.
There are more
right.
people, and Malthus said there are going to be too many people because they're going to increase geometric while they, and that. But now the living standard, do you understand? There's more haves and have-nots through time.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true, and things don't
absolutely not axiomatic.
I don't know. I don't know that I.
We'll stick with
axioms. There's not very many axioms.
All right.
But I mean, things certainly
absolutely true.
Over time have moved in that direction.
A higher percentage of the world population are haves, can be seen to be haves at the level of capability through time.
Yeah, I mean, 300 years ago, it used to be 1% had everything. And
it got up, and Fuller measured that, and he got down, he said we didn't get up to about 10% on his measuring. You have to measure world game non-ideologically. Yeah. We got 10% by the First World War, 20% by the Second World War, and he said it's going up like this now. And this is all pre-cyber and everything. He said from 1952, he projected, he said, we're going to cross the 50% mark. Around 20 years out from 1952, had left out his life, we crossed that 50% mark in terms of his findings around the year 1970. That's when there was a lot going on. You weren't even born.
No.
It was
a very different world then.
It's interesting that you went right to the year 1970. I mark it in your mind. I think that's going to end up being year one in the long sweep of human existence in this universe.
It's a continuum,
Well, it's just that's when it became, in his reckoning, and there were other modelings, Bookchin and others, who said that the percentage of world population that realistically could be seen to be haves in terms of our capability crossed the 50% mark. And went up. So we were entering then, we were coming to a world at the level of capability, latent, of transcending material scarcity.
Yeah, there's certainly...
That's a big transformation.
Yeah.
Out of history, everything was scarce. So all your modeling is done, and all your architecture, all your assumptions of human nature, everything was based upon a reality where the reality of scarcity material scarcity, I don't know about metaphysical, but scarcity was the reality, and then it was being transformed at a higher level of the evolution of consciousness.
I think over time, the forces involved with just economics and a free market will lead to more and more people having sort of more power over their lives, and sort of like this idea you're talking about of more people being haves. The alternative argument was, for example, made by Ted Kaczynski, the famous Unabomber, who was a brilliant guy, obviously. Obviously a sociopath.
Kurzweil paid attention to him, philosophically.
Yeah, well, effectively, the Unabomber's argument was that over time, with all this new technology and everything, you'll only have effectively people who are rich don't need any of the other people, because once you have sort of technology that effectively can do anything that a biological human can do, then all the people who don't have money, you just don't even need them for anything. But
you could let them all die off.
Yeah,
or you could kill them all.
Well, that's the Unabomber. He was trying to stop that from happening, or trying to effectively stop people from becoming domestic animals.
He was trying to link back to being nested in nature, Rousseau or something. We're nested, and that human nature is in that. There's these things, and that the technology is an evil thing. There's a lot. It's an anti-Luddite feeling,
Yeah, well,
because
Luddite,
the security, what little security the people have had, is going to be taken away from them, because the only way the people have had any way to have security is to have a little job function they can perform in a factory that's owned by some small group of people, and they were like what the Marxists would call wage slaves, and they had to do what they were told, like your French teacher wanted you to learn the ability to do, so they'll fit into a corporate enclave where they will do what they're told, and speaking French, yes, absolutely, right, and so that's the thing we're going through now, and in fact I think it's true.
Well, and what I was going to say is the flaw in his reasoning was that he, like many people who project doom, they take everything the way it is now, and they take one or two things, and they extrapolate those, and they attempt to look at what the world would look like as if nothing except one or two things changed and progressed. And that was his biggest, and that's the biggest flaw. Effectively, if you think about, for example, the reason we can have so much human effort, which is economic power and human effort are effectively the same thing. Because money is just a way of keeping track of resources.
Well, the capital assets are productive. You have a factory and there's nobody in there working. It's hard to have a labor theory of value be defining the distribution of what's being done when it's just a machine that's producing all kinds of, say, Sara Lee cheesecake. There's not a single person working in it.
I think you lost me on that.
No. You don't know Sara Lee cheesecake. It's really good. It's made factory, and there's not a person working in there. It's just all machines. The machines are turning it out.
But people design the factory.
Well, they are designed. You can argue that the human input and the labor theory of value is really important, all the labor input. That's what we're doing, and that's what informs all of our economic theory and our political process. And you'll notice all they talk about is we got to create jobs.
Yeah.
And Keynes said in 1930 to a letter to his grandchildren, you're going to be confronted with something in their maturity, that'll be about now, which is going to be massive, technologically induced unemployment. And the only way we have to reduce income to people, demand, is by them having what they call a job. It would be like you having in the classroom with your French teacher and doing what you're told on a serf as a feudal estate in order to have a little income to buy the things that clear the market. And you don't have any demand capability. They're talking about a jobless recovery, and the thing is just sputtering.
Well,
the recovery is sputtering because you're coming into a new era. And the people and responsibility don't have a vision. Yeah. You could distribute the assets, ownership of the cap. When you form the capital, you could distribute income massively as an instrument of income distribution, not Keynesian.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? You could do it, but we haven't done that. We haven't gotten to that because we're imbued with this idea of how wonderful it is to work on an assembly line and turn a nut.
Well, so the world...
Or learn the French lesson like you're supposed to. Well, rather than following your own lead and having the ability to follow your own lead as you want to do in a libertarian way.
Yeah, well, I'm not a libertarian. I mean,
I think
the world all depends on a whole lot of other people. I mean, any one person on their own, no matter how smart they are, can't really accomplish very much without a society behind them.
That's true.
But effectively, I think that, and this is sort of a resource allocation thing, I'm sort of wired in a way that I think the world works best when sort of every resource gets optimally used. So I mean, I guess you're talking about avoiding wasted potential. So I mean, so if there's nothing there, then it's no big loss. But the wasted potential is a very sad thing. And so when you have people who are capable of thinking and being creative, and maybe for some people the best thing is working on an assembly line, but that's...
Or maybe you should have stayed and
things are
taken
generally
15
better.
years of French use of the pluperfect tense in
Yeah.
the south of France,
Well, I learned-
rather than
yeah.
going off on your own tack, because they know what it is you have to do and you get specialized out, and that's what they do to the intellectual class coming up. Hence, we have no vision. Who are our visions that have a vision of how we're going to distribute, how we're going to set up the world order now that ephemeralization, they can do more and more with less. The computer is down to a chip. It used to be a room full of vacuum tubes.
But
we
we
don't
have
have to
more of
rape
them.
the planet, but we cannot, and we don't need laborers like on the assembly line to do rote things like the
Exactly.
educational process trying to get us to do. We have to have people who can think independently, autodidactically like you, in order to be free to be able to do what it is they want to do rather than being wage slaves.
Exactly, and so...
Well, that's a big... We don't have a system that lets us distribute demand to the people except through jobs for the masses.
Well,
I mean, not for the geniuses.
And I think that still works, but I guess so. So, for example, one way that and this is actually even before I heard of this guy Ray Kurzweil, and
Yeah,
his
he's great.
thinking.
I love Ray. Yeah.
Yeah, he's very logical, and I haven't found anything logically inconsistent with what he's ever said, which is what's so unusual.
He speaks his books. Did you know that?
Oh,
He's
yeah.
a spiritual machine. He doesn't write them. He speeches them, and it comes out.
And he
voice.
invented the technology.
He
to do
did
that,
indeed.
so
He's great, and he's got this
better.
singularity idea, and that's all interesting. And that's preforming a qualitative transformation,
Yeah.
not a continuation in a steady state that we're coming out of history at the point.
And so one thing, even before I heard of Kurzweil, that this is from a really young age, and I don't know where this came from. I think probably, I just learned it from my parents and this, but
Yeah.
I was always terribly afraid of spending a lot of time getting good at something that would soon be obsolete. And so, and so this is sort of what comes back to labor and the evolution of jobs and all this kind of thing. Is there's always this creative, destructive process going on where the old things, like the people who used to switch telephone boards. I mean, that job is obsolete.
Lily
now.
Tomlin.
Yeah.
Do you remember Lily Tomlin, the
I don't know
comedian?
who that
She was
is.
the one who was on Saturday Night Live and was connecting everybody by telephone.
Oh yeah,
Individual, and she had a great way about her. But
I saw that sketch.
yeah.
But so the point is, jobs will change over time, and they'll require different things of people. And if the people, the laborers, and students and schools didn't change and evolved along with that changing need, then yeah, we would have some terrible doomsday scenario, sort of like you're talking about. But things have changed. And I mean, that's always happened, and certainly people can talk about a jobless recovery or something now. But
go on. They're not going to. You have supply. You got a great capability to provide, let's say, good stuff to everybody.
Yeah.
You can manufacture all kinds of wonderful things that are good design and everything, but the people have to have money to buy to clear the market. And in the old days, they had to just go to Mr. Ford's factory off the farm, or they could go to there. And now that's catching up with us. And that the 90% of the production has nothing to do with labor input, intellectual or physical. It's all capital instruments. They're tinily owned by a tiny class of people. And then the people,
well, I don't know.
I mean, that's what's
that's
being
not
proposed.
so true. I mean, that's the thing that owns the capital inputs. I mean, they're things like pension funds that are beneficially owned by all the laborers. So I mean, it's not a case of some small number of elite or something.
You don't think we have a plutocracy, an economic plutocracy?
Well, unfortunately, because of tax policies over the last decade and a half, the inequality has widened, and I think that will start to contract.
You think so? Under Obama? And
I think Obama is likely to do things like raising taxes on the wealthy, and I think he should. I think that's the people who are wealthy in the world. I mean, they owe the fact that they're wealthy to the whole society around them. I mean,
and they also have great power to put money in congressmen's pocket to get legislation that can be not dealing with externalities or any of those things.
And so,
or they can ship to China and exploit human labor and make, they
and
can.
Some people will do that, and they'll try to exercise their
and
power
they have throughout all of history
for their own benefit.
They're like the people, the castles on the with the kings in the feudal period.
And that happens. But I mean, if you look at guys like Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, I mean,
there you go. Now he's somebody that follows your fellow that you were talking about.
Yeah, well, Warren Buffett.
Buffett.
I would be considered a Buffett disciple along
right.
with other
Okay,
people
that's important. You got Buffett and Kurzweil. You got two good
they're
people.
kind of my two heroes.
And your background is this fellow. What's his name again? Dodd. No, the fellow.
Well, Ben Graham.
Ben Graham.
Was Buffett's teacher.
He was Buffett's
and he was
teacher.
The grandfather of.
And
it's
conservativeness in a certain sense, and looking for the reality in a conservative way.
Yeah.
And that's part of an
sticking to what you know. It's sticking to what is knowable.
Well, do not they write that into the models that the big investment firms put before the traders and so forth, so that they can make the best possible decisions about the quarter point over prime advantage that they can get over somebody else and all that? They got computer programming that can put these things into programs and get more and more sophistication, more included, more pattern, and get down to where there'll be algorithms that will be able to deliver that kind of information almost autonomically to the people who are making the decisions on, do we build a water project here? Do we do this? The investment decisions that the bankers have been involved in?
Well, I think for asset purchase decisions for companies, they probably have more information now. Like, for example, if you're running Starbucks and you want to figure out if you should put a new store in a city, you'll have more information, from demographics and demand data.
Yeah.
So you'll be able to make a more accurate decision of whether that would be
better take on reality,
a good use of resources,
better than what you would have had out in the past.
Yeah. So I think that's true for that kind of thing, and that sort of actually operations research. My major focuses a lot. My college major focuses a lot on the sort of business intelligence is what they call it. So using data and information in the world to make intelligent asset decisions. That doesn't apply to a capital market, though.
You don't think? Okay.
No. So a capital market is very different because there's so much focus on what other people think in the short term. So by flipping things around, and instead of focusing on the asset itself, you focus on the other participants and focus on what their opinion is, so which is the same thing as saying the price data.
Okay, that's also like too much information. Rumors.
And it's not information.
Yeah, it's not
noise.
Yeah, no, exactly.
It's just an opinion. It's just
a
fleeting opinion.
Yeah, and that's operative in general in the society. Some people call it dumbing down or something. It's just
yeah, I mean the idea that
rumors
there's this theory that the CAP-M, it's called, and effectively it's the idea that you can reduce any asset on the stock market to one number, which is called beta, which is 1 for the whole market, and it's a measure of how correlated something is. So if beta is 2, then it means that the price line is going to be twice as squiggly as the market line, and if it's half as squiggly. But the idea that everything is perfect, the market is perfectly efficient, and people will always understand everything about the information that's in front of them is just total nonsense, because there's always biases that will creep into thinking. I mean, an interesting experimental.
We've only got a few seconds left. So what if we may? That's really interesting. We just scratched the surface. We got to do more.
Sure.
And you've got to be able to present yourself on television and multimedia to get out to a wider audience.
And this is the new internet thing.
This is a new thing, yeah. But we want to make sure we get your site and everything and the graphics in to run. And so you have a site that they can go to, and maybe you could give them that information so the people who are viewing can get in touch with you?
Well, I mean, sure, if anybody's interested in talking about these sort of things, I mean, maisoncapital.com. I mean, it's not a public forum or anything like that.
No.
I mean, it just has a little bit of information about what I do.
It's got quite a lot of information, and very good information, if I may say so. And tracking of what's been done. And
well, it's important to describe the reasoning for me as an investor. Whether people agree with me over the next month or quarter or year, that doesn't mean anything. It's whether the reasoning and the facts are correct.
Right.
And whether my understanding of reality is better than other people who I'm competing against.
I think that's what sets aside some people who are better than others at trying to deal with the reality issues in terms of a comprehensive understanding of what's going on and pattern recognition. And I think that's what investing and the whole market thing is